quotation from David Ford at the top of page 22 is from that book that we recommended, A Brief Introduction to Theology by David Ford, and it was associated with Module B. It's very well worth looking up the comments that he makes about biblical interpretation and some of the things that you can do. This particular comment, I think we need to take to heart, because the reality is we all of us find ourselves located in a particular place. Instead of trying to pretend that we're neutral and looking at things from a neutral stance, better to acknowledge where we stand, and then we know in our discussions with each other where we stand. And let's always be open to the possibility of seeing things through other people's eyes. Wenham and Walton make it clear where they stand as optimistic, critical realists, and that's where I stand too. I am very indebted to George Caird in my early days, and many other teachers like him. And I also feel indebted to Tom Wright. I'm very drawn to Marcus Borg, but I think more to Tom Wright. I have found John Dominic Crossan's writings absolutely fascinating, not least in the way they open up the society of the day. Someone like Ched Myers, though I have to say that I draw back from some of the more reconstructionist points of view that some of those writers have, and the kind of more pessimistic critical realism that such writers have. I find myself optimistic that we can, by the use of historical tools, build up a picture of the Jesus of history. And I'm very much drawn to analysis of the society of the day, opened up by recent archaeology, recent manuscript discoveries, and recent techniques of discovery. I'm drawn to valuing oral tradition, rather as Richard Bauckham did in Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. And I believe that it is possible to draw up a picture of who this Jesus is, what he stands for, and what kind of a person he is. And so I take my stand there, and I'm open about that, and you will read different views, and you will make up your own mind, and you know where you stand now, and maybe looking at some of this material, you'll find yourself seeing things in a different light, perhaps reinforced in the place where you stand at the moment. It takes us back to the observations that in each of the Gospel writers records at the pivotal moment for Matthew, Mark and Luke. I'm saying each of the first three Gospel writers record the confession of Peter at Caesarea Philippi. And for Matthew, Mark and Luke, in differing ways, it's a pivotal moment. And each of them record the comment the crowds make about Jesus. Who do people say that I am? And it's interesting and worthwhile just turning back to those passages. I'll take the one from Mark's Gospel as an example. The disciples answered, John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. And he says, but who do you say that I am? Now, I am drawn by people like Tom Wright, Marcus Borg, to take seriously the comment the disciples make. Now, I used not to be in that place. I used to think that the conversation went along these lines. Oh, the crowd say John the Baptist. Well, of course you're not John the Baptist. Elijah. Well, of course you're not Elijah. One of the prophets. Well, of course you're not that. The crowds have got it so wrong. Who do you say that I am? You are the Messiah. That's it. That's the person that Christ is. Now, I'm drawn by Tom Wright and Marcus Borg and others to reassess that. And I'm drawn to the thought that actually all the Gospel writers record this. As we'll see later, there are many other people who respond by saying that Jesus is a prophet. Maybe they make that response because, indeed, that was the shape that Jesus' ministry had taken. He lined himself up with John the Baptist and was baptized by him. He preaches the kingdom of God. He, in his miracles, raising that widow's son at Nain is an excellent example, echoes the kind of miracles that Elijah and Elisha did. His preaching is accompanied by storytelling and by miracles of healing, and it speaks to the people and it challenges the authorities. It has about it the feel of a prophet. Now, if you can get hold, as these module notes suggest, of the meaning of Jesus by Marcus Borg and Tom Wright jointly, and Jesus and the Victory of God, and get hold of those chapters and read those chapters, you will see how seriously these historians address the gospel story and come to a very convincing argument that indeed the crowds had got it right. Now, that is not to say, and I want to make that absolutely clear, that Jesus was a prophet and no more than a prophet, as this paragraph from Tom Wright says on page 23 here of the module notes. It is not that Jesus was a prophet and no more than a prophet, but he was, yes, a prophet, but actually more than that as well. So, coming back to those passages, let me try reading the account in Luke's Gospel. They answered, John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others that one of the ancient prophets has arisen. And Jesus says to them, but who do you say that I am? In the tone of voice to imply, well, yes, they've got it right so far. And what about you? What have you seen? They're right so far, but is there something more? And that's the kind of path that we're going to go down. And we do that on the basis of a close reading of the text, on the basis of an optimistically critical realist approach to the history, in the belief and conviction that we are touching something of the Jesus of history as we explore that insight that the crowds might be on the right lines when they say Jesus is a prophet. Now, how do we understand what it is they meant? How would they recognize Jesus as a prophet? Well, of course, the crowds in question are all Jewish crowds. These are all people steeped in the scriptures of the Hebrew scriptures. And if we are to have a handle on Jesus as the crowds saw Jesus, if we're to answer why it is the crowds made that assessment, we need to have an appreciation of the Hebrew scriptures, from the Hebrew scriptures, of what a prophet is. That's where we're going to turn next. And we want to do that not simply as background to the New Testament and a study of the Gospels, but we want to come alongside, come into the skin of the crowds, and so we want to seek to study those Hebrew scriptures in their own right. And so there'll be 3 units in this module that home in on the great prophets of the Old Testament. And in our next teaching session, we're going to open up the way towards a discussion and exploration of those prophets. And we'll be asking questions like, well, who are the prophets in the Hebrew scriptures? What was it that they did? And as we do that, then we'll be able to come back and see once more Jesus as prophet. And perhaps we'll come on to see Jesus as more than a prophet as well. That is all in store.